Mrs. Kate at the Library of Whispers. Today I'm going to take you on a whispered journey through stories and tales of Whitby, a history of Whitby in North Yorkshire on the coast. This reading is from 1817. It's from A History of Whitby and Strangel Abbey by George Young. We're going to start with popular customs. On Plough Monday, the first Monday after 12th day, and some days following, there is a procession of rustic youths dragging a plough, who, as they officiate for oxen, are called ploughstots. They are dressed with their shirts on the outside of their jackets, with sashes of ribbons fixed across their breasts and backs, and knots or roses of ribbons fastened on the shirts and on their hats. Besides the plough draggers, there is a band of 6 in the same dress, furnished with swords, who perform the sword dance, while one or more musicians play on the fiddle or flute. The sword dance, probably introduced by the Danes, displays considerable ingenuity, not without gracefulness. The dancers arrange themselves in a ring with their swords elevated, and their motions and evolutions are at first slow and simple, but become gradually more rapid and complicated. Towards the close, each one catches the point of his neighbour's sword, and various movements take place in consequence, one of which consists in joining or plaiting the swords into the form of an elegant hexagon or rose in the centre of the ring, which rose is so firmly made that one of them holds it up above their heads without undoing it. The dance closes with taking it to pieces, each man laying hold on his own sword. During the dance, 2 or 3 of the company, called toms or clowns, dressed up as harlequins in the most fantastic modes, having their faces painted or masked, are making antic gestures and movements to amuse the spectators, while another set, called magis or magipegs, clumsily dressed in women's clothes and also masked or painted, go about from door to door, rattling gold canisters in which they receive money. When they are well paid, they raise a huzzah. Where they get nothing, they shout hunger and starvation. When the party do not exceed 40, they seldom encumber themselves with a plough. They parade from town to town for 2 or 3 days, and the money collected is then expended in a feast and dance, to which the girls who furnish the ribbons and other decorations are invited. Sometimes the sword dance is performed differently, a kind of farce in which songs are introduced, being acted along with the dance. The principal characters in the farce are the king and the miller, the clown and the doctor. Egton Bridge has long been the chief Analogous to this idolatrous practice is St. Agnes's fast, performed on her day, January the 21st. The devotee fasts all day, tasting neither meat nor drink, and just before going to bed offers this prayer to the saint: Fair St. Agnes, play thy part, and send to me my own sweetheart, not in his best. This done, the idolater goes to bed backwards, and the sequel is the same as above. Of a like description, though not connected with a particular season, is the making of the dumb cake. 3 young women make a cake of flour with the first egg of a young hen immediately before going to bed. The cake, being baked over the fire, is cut into 3 parts, and each receives one, eats a part, and puts the remainder below her pillow, wrapped in the stocking taken from her left leg. Each goes backward to bed, expecting to dream as above, but if a word is uttered during the process, or before falling asleep, the charm is broken. It is unnecessary to notice the pranks of Valentine Day, or the sports of Shrove Monday and Shrove Tuesday. The last 2 are here named Collop Monday and Pancake Tuesday, from the nature of the food with which they are sanctified. The latter is a noted holiday. The pancake bell, which is rung in the forenoon, not only announces the hour when the frying of pancakes ought to begin, but proclaims a general jubilee for children, apprentices, and servants. Little attention is paid to the fast of Lent. It is when religion consists in feasting that it is popular. The 6 Sundays in Lent are distinguished by different titles, and 2 of them are shamefully profaned. The 5th, called Carling Sunday, is celebrated in the evening by a feast of carlings, that is, steeped peas fried with butter. II, or about that time, is kept up to a certain extent. They are small round loaves, sold by the bakers at a farthing each, chiefly for presents for children. In former times it was usual to keep one or two of them for good luck. A lady in Whitby has a sole mass loaf, about 100 years old. The pranks of All Hallows even are here confined to the burning of nuts. It is therefore denominated Nutcracker Night. Now we go to superstitions relating to particular places. These may now be regarded as obsolete, yet some of them are too curious to be wholly omitted. At the north end of Cliffrick Wood, a little to the east of Langborough Quarry, is a copious spring, once the resort of superstition. It was supposed that when a shirt or shift was taken from a sick person and thrown into this well, the person would recover if it floated, but would die if it sunk. A rag of the shirt was torn off and hung on the bushes as an offering to St. Oswald, to whom the well was dedicated, and so numerous were the devotees that, as an ancient writer states, the quantity of rags suspended at one time around the well might have furnished materials for a ream of paper. It is called Chapel Well, having once had a chapel or cell beside it, with a bath and other conveniences. As superstition is the handmaid of impiety, it is not surprising to find that a Sunday fair was held here for many ages. This disgraceful nuisance is now happily removed. There is a small spring on Rosebery Topping, which was formerly imagined, perhaps from superstition, to have great efficacy in curing sore eyes, and there was a hole in a rock at the Hermitage on that hill called Wilfrid's Needle, through which devotees were wont to creep. As some springs were patronised by saints, others were deemed the resort of fairies, particularly Claymore Well, near Kettleness, where, according to report, the fairies in days of yore were wont to wash their clothes and to bleach and beat them, and on their washing nights the strokes of the battledore were heard as far as Runswick. A very mischievous fairy called Jeanie of Biggersdale resided at a place so called at the head of Mulgrave Woods. A bold young farmer, perhaps under the influence of John Barleycorn, undertook one night on a wager to approach the habitation of the sprite and call to her, but his rashness nearly cost him his life. Jeanie angrily replied that she was coming, and while he was escaping across the running stream, he fared worse than Burns, Tam O'Shanter, when pursued by Nanny the witch, for Jeanie, overtaking him just as his horse was half across, cut it into two parts, though fortunately he was on the half that had got beyond the stream. Another serial being, which we may suppose to have been a hobgoblin, had his dwelling in Hob Hole, near Runswick. He was more benevolent than Jeanie, for his powers were exercised in curing young children of the whooping cough. When any child in Runswick or the vicinity was Slices are commonly sent on the wedding day to particular friends, and in many instances, small portions are passed 9 times through the bride's ring and giving to young people for dreaming bread. Amongst genteel families, the bride receives morning calls from her friends for 2 or 3 days after the nuptials and sits to receive company, together with the bridegroom, for 3 nights after their appearance at church. She afterward returns the calls of her friends, attended by her bridesmaid. The funeral rites of the district are much diversified. Several genteel families bury in the morning. The corpse is conveyed in the hearse to the churchyard and carried into the church on the shoulders of porters, covered by the pall. The pall-bearers and a few others have gloves and silk scarves which are black, if the deceased was married, and white if unmarried. In these funerals, the female relations do not attend. Sometimes there are afternoon funerals conducted nearly in the same form, but in every case the corpse is conveyed to the grave by the neighbours, to several of whom it is usual to give some money. 2, 3, or 4 females, called servers, distribute wine and sugar biscuits before the procession moves, and walk before it to the grave dressed in white, with knots of white ribbons on their left breasts. A singular custom, now nearly obsolete, once prevailed at the funerals of unmarried females. A garland, composed of 2 circular hoops, crossing each other, dressed with white paper, cut into flowers or leaves, with a paper glove in the centre, bearing the name and age of the deceased, was carried before the corpse, and afterwards suspended from the roof of the church. Now we'll talk about the state of morals and religion in the area. The existence of so much superstition is a proof that the moral character of the inhabitants is not the most eminent, and too many additional proofs might easily be advanced. Yet it is pleasing to observe that the district is much improved within the last 30 or 40 years. Many gross superstitions have become obsolete, and others yet retained are practised only for diversion. Many villages and dales that were the abodes of ignorance and irreligion abound with pious and worthy characters. 40 years ago, almost every village and hamlet had its Sunday fair, but this impious practice is now abolished, except in the villages of Skinninggrave, Saltburn, Redcar, and Lackenby. It must be confessed, however, that in merely shifting the Sunday fairs to Monday or Saturday, the Reformation was left incomplete, for when fairs approach so near to the Sabbath, they must needs interfere in some degree with the business of that sacred day. This remark is applicable is most likely that it was intended to be used as a coin, and we may suppose it to belong to that ancient era when unstamped pieces of the precious metals were circulated as money. It is possible, however, that it may belong to the Roman era and had been intended for a coin, but having cracked under the moneyer's hammer, it was not stamped, but put aside, and by some accident or other was brought hither and lost. That the name of this town or port does not occur in any of the Roman records, yet when we consider how near it is approached by the Roman road, which will afterwards be described, there cannot be a doubt that it was a place of some consequence under their government, and that their coasting vessels frequented the harbour, which is the principal inlet in the small bay, supposed to be the Dunham Sinus of Ptolemy. If the Romans had any fort here, it probably stood on the east cliff, near where the abbey was afterwards built, this being the most advantageous situation, but it is likely that they had other habitations on the west side of the Esk, from whence there was a more easy communication with the Roman road, and with Dunsley, where it is thought to have terminated. The only Roman coin known to have been found in Whitby was discovered on this side of the water. It is a beautiful silver denarius of Hadrian, and being found deep in the earth by some workmen digging a foundation for a house in Backdale several years ago, it proves that the Romans frequented this place in the reign of that emperor or not long after. Whether any other Roman remains appeared on the spot where the coin was found has not been ascertained, for as no particular notice was taken of it at the time, and as it was not even known to be a Roman coin till it was given to the author a few months ago, the discovery did not lead to any further investigation. After the departure of the Romans, this place seems to have been little frequented till the days of Lady Hilda, when numbers attracted by the celebrity of her monastery took up their abode in its neighbourhood. Under Elfleda, her successor, the port appears to have had some shipping belonging to it, for we find that Abbess taking a voyage with some of the brethren as far as Coquette Island to meet St. Cuthbert. The principal part of the town in that age and during the rest of the Saxon period was on the east cliff near the abbey, yet there can be no doubt that the fishermen, the boat builders, and other connected with seafaring burgesses of Whitby should not be allowed to use the liberties granted them by the abbot and convent of Whitby. There are 4 principal ways into Whitby, and it is by no means improbable that they were the extremities of those 4 streets called gates or ways. They are Haggersgate, Flowergate, Baxtergate on the west side of the Esk, and Kirkgate, which now receives the modern name Church Street on the east. This last ascended the east bank in the direction of Spittlebrig, where the hospital stood, and by this way the York Road then proceeded, as well as the roads for Stainsacre and Horsker, and for Larpool and Sneaton. Haggersgate led towards the west stands, Flowergate towards Dunsley, Blythe, etc., and Baxtergate towards Stakesby, Russop, and other places. The names of these 4 principal streets or gates do not, however, occur in any record for several years after the time of the abbot Richard II, nor were their names the same in former days as they are now. The street called Flora or Floor, afterwards Floorgate and now Flowergate, occurs in the charter of Walter, the son of Godfrid, in the time of Roger, who was abbot of Whitby from 1222 to 1244, and it is observable that among the witnesses to that charter we find William the Merchant and William the Dyer, a proof that even at this early date Whitby was not a mere fishing town. This street is also named in the charter of Geoffrey York in 1267, in that of Thomas de Birmingham in 1294, and in the lease granted to Richard Landmot in 1313. This street derives its name from an appendage to Whitby Manor, which in the charters of the Percy family is called Flora and Floor, and in Domesday, Floren, and which seems to have been bounded by the lands of Stakesby on the south, the cliffs on the north, the River Esk on the east, and Upgang Beck on the west. The name seems to have no connection with flowers or with the goddess Flora, but rather with the word floor, the territory so denominated being comparatively flat. Kirkgate occurs in 1318 in the charter of Alexander Her, and the lease given to John at Geld. Hackles Court, the old name of Haggersgate, is found in the charter of Hugh Swinbull, who had a shop and solar there, towards the street. This charter belongs to the year 1296, or to the end of the 13th century. The abbot's book mentions the houses in Whitby about the same period, without naming the streets where they stood, and among the tradesmen then in the town we find Alexander the Weaver, Roger the Dyer, William the Fuller, and William the Smith. Baxtergate does not occur in the register, and hence some have imagined that it is a modern street. Nay, we are told that the place where it stands was overflowed by the tide at the time of the dissolution, and that no house existed there, till nearly 50 years after, when some part of it being gained from the sea and stathed off, it took the denomination of Baxtergate from a bakehouse. But these are groundless conjectures, nor is there any good reason for supposing that Baxtergate is less ancient than Haggersgate, which is named but once in the register. There are in principal streets in the town. In proof of its antiquity, I may also notice that several tenements in Baxtergate were then called burgage tenements, which name they still retain, that they had garths, gardens, orchards, etc. belonging to them, and that beside the Cholmondeley family, several other respectable families had possessions in this street, as Sir Thomas Gower, Sir William Gascoigne, Nicholas Conyers, Esquire of Bagdale Hall, the Bushels, Linskills, etc., to which may be added that in the description of the property in that street, about the era referred to, staiths are rarely mentioned. The premises on the north side of the street reached those belonging to the south side of Flowergate, while those on the opposite side are described in some instances as bounded on the south by the River Esk, in others by Bagdale Beck, then frequently called the Slike, and by the Walker Sands, the name then given to the sands which reached from Bagdale Beck to Bog Hall, now occupied by the shipyards and the ropery. It is observable that the horse mill, already noticed, is mentioned so early as 1595, at which date there were two houses called the Herring Houses on the north side of the street, where perhaps herrings were formerly cured or sold. Nor must I omit to state that on or near the very spot where the present Baxtergate Chapel stands, there was property belonging to the parish church of Whitby in 1574, which was bought by the Bushel family in 1599 or 1600. The name of the street, instead of owing its origin to a bakehouse, appears to be derived from a family of the name of Baxter, who had considerable property there. It is probable, however, that the name Baxtergate was not coeval with the street itself, but what was the original name, or whether it ever had any other name, has not been ascertained. On the whole, there is little reason to doubt that one of the four principal ways into Whitby, mentioned in the charter of Richard de Waterville, entered by this street. There was the more propriety in calling the streets of Whitby, at that era, gates or ways, as they were unlike the streets of the present day. When we speak of one of those ancient streets, we must not form in our minds the idea of a well-paved causeway with a row of contiguous houses on either side, but figure to ourselves a kind of open, irregular road, scarcely paved at all, with the lands on both sides divided into tofts and half-tofts, each containing one or more houses or cottages, with some space intervening, having a garden or garth behind and perhaps a small garth in front. Such were the streets of Whitby for many ages after the time of the Abbot Richard II, and while the streets were very irregular in their form, the houses were for the most part thatched cottages, constructed in the simplest manner, bearing no resemblance to the elegant mansions of modern times. Though there is no reason to suppose that Baxtergate was overflowed by the sea so late as the time of the dissolution, yet it is worthy of remark that not only a part of that street, but a considerable portion of Church Street and other streets on the banks of the river must have been originally built where beds of sand were once thrown up. The remains of these beds of sands have often been met with digging out cellars or foundations, both in the east end of Baxtergate and in several parts of Church Street and other streets, even in situations far above the present high